Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Jeremy Ng, and I'd like to thank the European Congress for Integrative Medicine Committee for providing me with the opportunity to present a project that I completed as part of my doctoral work at the Department of Health Research Methods, Evidence and Impact at McMaster University in Hamilton, Canada, relating to attitudes towards medical cannabis among Ontario family physicians. Cannabis has been legally available for select medical conditions in Canada since 2001. Until recently, however, regulations made access to medical cannabis difficult, limiting its use by patients. On October 17, 2018, the Cannabis Act came into effect, legalizing the sale and use of recreational cannabis across Canada. Licensed healthcare practitioners can provide authorization for patients to acquire medical cannabis, who can then register with Health Canada to produce a limited amount of cannabis for personal use, designate another individual to produce their medical cannabis, or acquire cannabis for medical purposes through a licensed producer. The number of Canadians authorized to use medical cannabis increased from about 24,000 in June 2015 to almost 400,000 by September 2020. The increased use of medical cannabis was likely the result of the easing of regulations, greater availability given the growing number of producers and cannabis clinics, as well as reduced stigma around the use of cannabis for therapeutic purposes. Now, market data from 2017 to 2019 show that Ontario ranks the highest among all provinces with respect to the amount of medical cannabis sold to clients and the total number of client registrations as well. So what we do know is that patients are increasingly seeking guidance from physicians regarding the benefits and harms of therapeutic cannabis. However, physicians receive minimal education on cannabis use during their own training. Moreover, the evidence for medical cannabis is limited and often conflicting. So the purpose of our study was to investigate attitudes towards medical cannabis among family physicians practicing in Ontario. So we conducted a descriptive qualitative research study and used thematic analysis to explore attitudes towards medical cannabis among family physicians. We followed the consolidated criteria for reporting qualitative research, or the COREC checklist, in order to report our findings. We recruited family physicians practicing in Ontario, Canada between January and October of 2019. We acquired our participants through snowball sampling. We reached out to these family physicians to provide contact information of colleagues who held variable views towards medical cannabis. We then asked participating physicians for contact information of colleagues we could approach to interview them as well. This continued until we interviewed enough physicians to achieve a saturation of themes and sub-themes on perspectives regarding medical cannabis. So we interviewed participants using an interview guide with open-ended questions. We developed and tested our guide in accordance with McGrath and colleagues' method, which is an article that provides 12 recommendations for conducting qualitative research interviews. Furthermore, we consulted qualitative studies on related topics to inform our interview guide as well, and we engaged a family physician to review our interview guide for clarity and completeness. For each participant, we collected demographic data, including sex, age, specialization, years of practice, location of medical school training, residency training, and site of practice, whether they practiced in an urban or rural setting as well. We also asked participants to state whether they authorized or prescribed medical cannabis. 3 of our team members conducted audio recorded phone interviews with the participants, and we stopped recruitment when 3 members of our team agreed that saturation of themes had been achieved, and 2 members of our team transcribed all interviews verbatim. We analyzed all interview data by applying inductive thematic analysis, which has been shown to be effective in investigating and describing a range of experiences. Two of our team members read the interview transcripts and notes several times. Next, the same team members coded and aggregated transcribed text into meaningful themes and subthemes and labeled constructs. We used an open coding process to establish the primary categories of information from each transcript independently and in duplicate, and then connected the categories to derive main themes and subthemes. Based on the codes generated from the analysis, the same two reviewers generated a set of theoretical propositions independently and in duplicate and achieved consensus. Lastly, all team members reviewed the results and confirmed the main themes and subthemes of our study findings, which were accompanied by supporting quotes. We interviewed a total of 11 Ontario family physicians, after which saturation was reached. Our participants included 6 men and 5 women who had been in practice for a median of 3.5 years. 8 attended medical school in Canada, 3 abroad. All had completed their family medicine residency in Canada. One participant also held additional specialization in public health and preventative medicine. And the mean interview time was approximately 30 minutes. We identified 3 main themes. The first is reluctance to authorize medical cannabis. The second is concerns over harm associated with medical cannabis. And the third was a lack of knowledge surrounding administration of medical cannabis. And each theme contained 4 subthemes, which I will detail in the upcoming slides. So with respect to theme 1, 8 physicians felt the evidence supporting the use of cannabis for medical purposes was limited. Specifically, they perceived that clinical trials were often poorly designed, followed patients for short periods of time, and did not inform long-term effects. Benefits in trials showing statistical significance were typically modest. All participants thought that cannabis could be helpful for managing chronic pain, specifically neuropathic pain. However, none of our physicians chose medical cannabis as the first line of treatment for any condition, and really only considered it after other treatment options had failed or if the patient specifically requested for cannabis. About half of the physicians we interviewed avoided authorizing medical cannabis altogether. Physicians who supported the therapeutic use of cannabis reported insufficient knowledge regarding what cannabis type to use, how to pursue dosing, and optimal monitoring. They preferred instead to refer patients to colleagues with an interest in cannabis. And despite all of this, however, participants noted it was important to keep an open mind. They were willing to consider that cannabis may have a role in healthcare, acknowledged that patients were increasingly asking about medical cannabis, and were aware of the need to address their own biases when engaging in discussions. So with respect to theme 2, about a third of physicians raised concerns about the effect of cannabis on neurocognitive development and queried whether cannabis use among adolescents and young adults may predispose them to mental illness. A couple physicians raised concerns about cannabis use among older adults, including the potential for drug interactions given the common occurrence of polypharmacy. They also raised concerns regarding adverse events associated with cannabis use. These included dizziness, sedation, concerns over older patients' quality of life, their ability to drive, and capacity to care for themselves as well. 3 physicians expressed concern over the impact of cannabis on people with pre-existing or who were at high risk for mental illness. Our participants noted that cannabis use may exacerbate patients' symptoms of depression and anxiety, or it may interfere with sleep. And although physicians largely referred patients who were interested in pursuing medical cannabis to practices that focused on this therapy, three raised concerns about the quality of care provided at these cannabis clinics. Participants perceived that very few patients were denied cannabis, and that in fact most patients were not provided with detailed explanations of potential harms. With respect to theme 3, about half of the physicians described their knowledge of medical cannabis as insufficient in regards to clinical indicators, dosing, or monitoring. Older physicians in particular were not exposed to information on medical cannabis in their medical school or residency training. More recent graduates received some lectures on medical cannabis, but they still did not feel that they were well versed on the topic. Almost all physicians expressed an interest in receiving education regarding medical cannabis. Some physicians expressed an interest in general topics such as clinical indications for cannabis and dosing. 2 physicians expressed frustration regarding their role with medical cannabis because of the atypical nature of the intervention and the limited impact of their involvement. Specifically, medical cannabis does not have to be dispensed by a pharmacist. Authorizing cannabis, does not lower the cost for patients, and physicians also cannot control the composition of cannabis used for therapeutic purposes in Ontario. So one physician even went as far as to say that there was no role for the medical profession after the legalization of cannabis for recreational purposes. About half of physicians raised the issue of how the legalization of recreational cannabis affected its therapeutic use. Nearly all participants felt that there was merit to preserving a separate stream for medical use, given the higher likelihood of more rigorous regulation for medical cannabis. Specifically, medical cannabis products would be required to be more consistent and adhere to higher safety standards. So with respect to our discussion, family physicians in our study were reluctant to authorize medical cannabis because of perceptions of limited supporting evidence, uncertainty regarding clinical indications and associated harms. Those willing to consider the use of medical cannabis typically referred interested patients to clinics that focused on this therapy, but at the same time, they were concerned that such clinics may provide cannabis indiscriminately without comprehensive discussion of the potential benefits and harms. This belief requires confirmation through additional formal study. Participants were largely supportive of both research and continuing education to inform their views on the role of medical cannabis for their patients. Our study highlights the importance of addressing the knowledge gaps of family physicians and their concerns surrounding medical cannabis. Further research should investigate the needs of family physicians as well as medical students and residents regarding cannabis education. Increased knowledge of the evidence for the benefits and harms of medical cannabis may improve physician comfort with discussing this topic with interested patients, and reduce patient reliance on cannabis clinics that may not always provide impartial advice. So just wrapping up, family physicians in our study were uncertain of the therapeutic potential of medical cannabis. The exception was the use of medical cannabis for chronic pain, particularly neuropathic, for which all participants thought the evidence supported effectiveness. Most physicians did not provide therapeutic cannabis to their patients and expressed uncertainty regarding its harms and appropriate use. And family physicians may benefit from guidance and education that addresses concerns they have surrounding medical cannabis. These are just a couple slides that show the references I referred to during my presentation. If anyone is interested in these further readings, please feel welcome to take a screenshot or contact me, and I'd be happy to share this list with you. I should also mention that we have published our study in CMAG Open. It is published as an open access article and therefore available for everyone to read. And if you'd like me to share the link with you, please feel welcome to contact me as well. With respect to acknowledgements, I'd like to thank Kevin, Sana, Yaping, and Jason, all of whom helped out with the data collection and analysis for this study. I should also mention that Jason was also my PhD supervisor. I've had the chance to learn so much from him, and I'm really grateful for his mentorship, especially now that I have already defended and submitted my thesis to the university. Thank you all for your kind attention. If anyone has any questions, I'd be more than happy to field them. If you'd like to connect with me, please feel free to do so by email, or you can find me on Twitter as well. Thank you very much.